You've probably seen the meme by now. The guy who supposedly flooded a whole town just so he could party for a night without his wife. Though the flood happened back in 1993 when the media landscape was very different, it's in recent years become one of the internet's favorite crazy true stories. But what if I told you that story leaves out almost everything that actually matters? Today we're digging into the case of James Scott, who was blamed for causing the Great Flood of 1993. James, known to his friends as Jimmy, had been known as a local bad boy, and some believe he was made a scapegoat. Jimmy was sentenced to life for causing this flood with no material evidence. And as I kept looking into his case, one question kept coming up. Did the internet turn an innocent man into a punchline? I want to break down what the internet doesn't know about what really happened. I spoke with Dr. Adam Pitluck, who wrote the book Damned to Eternity about James' story after first covering his case as a young journalism student. And I was also joined by Blake Babson, a filmmaker who's working on telling James' story on the big screen and became an advocate for his release from prison. James Scott has been sitting in a Missouri prison for 33 years. And as crazy as it sounds that one man could cause a catastrophic flood, the details of the case are actually even crazier.
Norman here received an insurance payout because he didn't have federal and flood insurance through FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. He wouldn't have been able to recuperate from this flood had somebody not vandalized the levees. So him and other people like him filed a homeowner's policy under the vandalism clause. And then all of a sudden, a month and a half later, they come up with James Scott, who vandalized the levee.
James was at the actual levee site and he did an interview. And if he hadn't done that interview, I think both Adam and I agree, nothing would have probably happened. It was the fact that he was on television and recognized by the locals as the local bad kid, that he became this very easy scapegoat. One of the tragic things about this case, on top of everything else, is because there's no evidence, it's also hard to overturn. When you hang someone on nothing, it's hard to prove nothing, right? And it's hard to prove against nothing. Getting behind this case has been very hard because what do you point to when there's nothing to point to? It's very difficult. It's that to me is the biggest tragedy here. As a man was hung on his past, you know.
Joe Flax said he heard at a party Jim say he was going to go break the levee to strand his wife in Missouri so he could party in Illinois without her. The trash paper in Quincy, Illinois, the Herald Whig did, by my count, over 100 stories throughout the course of this, all saying the same thing, all running with this party headline. But none of them ever reported the day after the flood. He drove 7 hours north to the only working bridge the day after the flood into Iowa to use that bridge to get to Missouri to go pick his wife up, and he brought her home. He brought her home the next day. He never partied. They didn't say any of that.
Their star witness, Joe Flax, never spoke again after his testimony, and is to this day has vanished.
Why aren't you talking? Like, why are the only people talking me and the soil scientist? You know, like it does not make sense. I think they're hiding something. And then really the most, and why did they cover up the scientists? Why were they afraid of the scientists? It's like a grounded theory. It's presenting itself the more research you do. Like, yes, I'm convinced he's innocent now. And yes, now I'm starting to convince, like, they're doing everything they can to keep him inside.
James is now 55 years old, with his first parole hearing coming up on July 22nd. And since recording this interview with Adam and Blake, Adam actually appeared on my friend the Tilted Lawyers podcast, and one of the investigators from Jimmy's case caught wind of that, and he didn't seem too happy. But more on that later. For now, this is where our story begins. So Adam, can you tell me how you first came across this story?
Yeah, I first was introduced to the story in 1998. I was a junior at the University of Missouri studying journalism, and I was a reporter for the Columbia Missourian newspaper, which is kind of like the student learning laboratory. It's produced by the journalism school, but it's actually the paper for the city of Columbia, Missouri, and the surrounding areas in Boone County. So my editor, Sharon Harrell, had just concluded watching the coverage of the second trial on Court TV, which they broadcast gavel to gavel. And she immediately called me in her office, said, there's this extraordinary case coming out of eastern Missouri, and it just doesn't make any sense. So go down to Jefferson City, go to the prison, get a hold of this guy, and you tell me what you think. Interview him and get your impression of him. So that was the first foray into this story. I think it's important, though, to note that I wasn't going down there trying to prove innocence. In fact, nowhere had I ever, in any reporting I had done up to and including the book, which came out in 2007, advocated for innocence. That came way later.
And then Blake, I'll ask you the same question. When did you kind of get a hold of this and come into the picture?
Yeah, I found this book, Damned to Eternity, that Adam wrote in 2015. And I think I read it maybe in 2 days. I grew up only about 4 hours north of Quincy, Illinois. I was 10 years old when the flood happened, so I actually remembered quite a lot of the details of the flood. Had never heard the story of James Scott until I read his book. And I knew at that moment I was going to do something about it. I was much younger at the time and didn't have the type of filmmaking reach that I might have now. So I knew I had to keep it and hold it and figure something out with it eventually. And about 8 or 9 months ago, Adam and I finally met. And I told him, listen, I don't have very many skills in life, but I know how to make movies, and I would love to make a movie about this. And my really only reason was because I felt like it might be the best way to get the story out. But that quickly turned into being an activist for James, just like Adam is, and really fighting to get this story out in the right way and not in the way it had been out in many people's kind of pop culture awareness of this story was simply the butt end of a joke, right? A guy who caused a flood to party. And I just wanted to do that justice and get his full story out.
Was there ever a point, I know that, Adam, you said you didn't advocate for innocence at first, but was there ever a point where either one of you thought he was guilty?
Well, I thought he was guilty when I was first assigned the story. I mean, he had been convicted. So, and because I hadn't watched the initial court TV trial, my editor had, I put my faith in her for this story. She said something didn't smell right, so just go figure it out. So yeah, I went in with the presumption that he is guilty. I mean, he's serving a life sentence in prison. Not only did I think he was guilty, I thought society was probably better off without him, because this sentence was extraordinary, especially when there were no deaths or injuries. The reason that changed, and like I said, it didn't change until over a decade later, is because the more layers of this onion I unpeeled, there was zero evidence. Like, I kept trying to figure out, well, what was the smoking gun, or in this case, the shovel or a stick of dynamite or the bulldog? Like, how could you break this levee? All the science points to the fact that it's impossible. So that was my first suspicion that I might be onto something here. And the reason I stuck with it as long as I did is because over time, every single person from the prosecution side, the prosecuting attorney, the judge, the arresting officers, which didn't have jurisdiction. They were on the wrong side of the river to be arresting for a Missouri crime. The Corps of Engineers, like, everyone stopped talking. They went silent. And this is the only case like it in American history, let alone Missouri history, a life sentence for causing a flood. You would think that the prosecution would be dunking on this. Mm-hmm. That it's like Bronson just gets MVP for the Knicks after winning the NBA championship, and they go to interview him, and he says no comment. I mean, that's essentially what's happening.
Yeah, I got you. Just tell me a little bit of like what actually happened that night or that day, and how the flood actually occurred, and then how he got pinned for it.
Sure. So in 1993, this was the 500-year flood. There had never been, the entire midsection of America was underwater. The Missouri River, the Mississippi River, all the tributaries that flow into them, including the Raccoon River out of Iowa, which fed prolonged rainfalls and a huge snow mass earlier that winter in the Pacific Northwest that melted rapidly, and all that water ran off. And then with the prolonged rains, the river rose to a stage that had never been recorded. And there had never been a flood this big. That levee was built to withstand 17 feet of water. In 93, it got up to 37 feet, 36 and a half feet. So the reason it was still holding water back is they bulldozed it up, and then they stacked sandbags, which is triage. I mean, they had to do it. There was no other way to get the levee high enough. On the night of the 16th of July, so we're nearing the anniversary of it. Essentially, it blew out. It started with the water going over the top, and then it just blew it completely out. What's interesting about that, though, is that there's actual live aerial footage. Airplanes were circling around. This is a pretty remote part of the state, so it begs the question, well, what were airplanes doing in the vicinity the minute it broke? The reason is because they've been failing like dominoes upriver for over a week. And this was just the next one in the sequence to fail, so they were waiting.
At this point, to me, and Adam, you can elaborate a little bit on it if you'd like, but to me, this is where the real criminal conspiracy aspect begins in the story, because James was at the actual levee site and he did an interview. And if he hadn't done that interview, I think both Adam and I agree, nothing would have probably happened. It was the fact that he was on television and recognized by the locals as the local bad kid, that he became this very easy scapegoat for everyone to pin it on. And, you forget what type of world we lived in '93, right? There was no internet, there was no social media. So the television was what everyone was watching. And suddenly this local kid that everyone knew as the local bad boy is on TV. You can see very quickly how in a small town that spreads very quickly into a rumor that maybe he had something to do with it. It's a ludicrous idea when you think about it now, because just because someone's there doesn't mean they're guilty, right? It's such a tragic way to pin something on someone, as if like, well, he's a bad person and he's in a place where something bad could have happened. He must have done it, right? It's about as despicable of a leap in judgment as you can imagine. And Adam, you can elaborate a little bit more about how that then led to his eventual arrest.
Yeah, they're literally, and in fact, there's television interviews. The sergeant in the Quincy, Illinois Police Department, which is across the river from where this alleged crime occurred in West Quincy, Missouri. So he lacked jurisdiction. His name was Sergeant Neil Baker. He was at home watching TV, and literally the second he saw James Scott doing an interview, and the reason James Scott was doing an interview, he was just grabbed randomly by the reporter. The minute he saw that interview, he called his brother, Detective Bruce Baker. So the two Bakers both work for the Quincy Police Department, neither one of whom were in the jurisdiction of what was an alleged crime. And he basically said, something doesn't sound right here. There's no way Jim Scott was on the levee to help. And so literally that was the genesis. They already had it in their mind that he broke the levee. Now it's just a matter of proving it. Mm-hmm. Based on a television appearance.
So this part of the story that made it go viral years and years later was this kind of meme-like presence that Blake touched on earlier, where people were saying this guy, wanted to party so hard he caused a flood, and it kind of became like a joke. Where did that come from? That statement and that kind of sentiment that he was trying to party so hard that he actually caused it himself and out of self-interest.
There were two trials about this, and that's important too. His first trial, he was convicted and given a life sentence. The reason there was a second trial is because of prosecutorial misconduct. The prosecution disobeyed jurisprudence, and they just didn't follow the rules. They didn't follow procedure. They had witnesses that they didn't alert the defense about. And so consider how egregious it must have been when the court-appointed defense lawyer was able to file for an appeal 5 years later and get it. So there was a second trial in '98. The motive changed between the two trials. At the second trial, the whole party idea came up from this 16-year-old kid named Joe Flax. He was, at the time, he was 16. He was under house arrest at the time. He was another local bad boy. He liked hanging around. Jim was about 5 years old, 4 or 5 years older, and so Joe he was a hanger-on. He liked to hang out with the big kids, the bad boys. They would be drinking beer and smoking cigarettes and just hanging out, watching St. Louis Cardinals baseball all summer long. When the two Baker brothers and a couple other law enforcement from the area went looking for, I'll call it evidence, but basically any kind of information to implicate James Scott. Joe Flax said he heard at a party Jim say he was going to go break the levee to strand his wife in Missouri, so he could party in Illinois without her. That was it. That was the motive. And the thing is, I would find out years later, there was about 6 or 7 people at that party. Every one of them was joking around. Nobody said it was in jest. It was just cloud talk. No, they were talking about if the levee broke, what they would do. And again, I mean, I'm not saying Jim was a model citizen, not by any stretch. In fact, society is probably better off with him in prison from those days. But that was it. That was essentially all law enforcement had to go on. So that's the reason. The testimony of a 16-year-old kid under house arrest. And then Blake, I'm curious as to the take on how that resonates outside of.
Yeah, I think we're all guilty of just reading headlines, right? I mean, that's just like in 1993, the headline, the very sensationalist headline of "Dude causes a flood so he can party" is a very captivating headline, and I am guilty as much as everyone else that once I read the book in 2015, I started to notice, especially as Instagram and social media took on, that whenever I would hear about James's case in pop culture, it would only come up in these short bursts of pretty much the butt of a joke, and an Instagram reel shared between friends, right? Wow, can you believe this legend, right? All this kind of memification of the story. And I think in many ways, I think that's what's become so difficult to talk about the case, right? Is even when I bring it up, when I first bring up the story of James, it's always met with laughter, right? Because that headline is almost brilliant in how effective it is in the evil that it did, right? Which was pin a ridiculous crime on someone with still to this day, not a singular, ounce of evidence against him. I think not only that, but also, and Adam and I have spoken about this a lot, and maybe this is also an interesting topic to discuss, but one of the tragic things about this case, on top of everything else, is because there's no evidence, it's also hard to overturn. When you hang someone on nothing, it's hard to prove nothing, right? And it's hard to prove against nothing. And Adam can speak a little bit more to that as well, but it's why, whether it was governors or politicians or even citizens, getting behind this case has been very hard, because what do you point to when there's nothing to point to? It's very difficult. It's that to me is the biggest tragedy here, is a man was hung on his past.
Something Blake just said is extremely important, and it needs to be expanded upon a little bit. That was the headlines. The New York Times showed up, the Washington Post, ABC, NBC, CBS. They were all there. St. Louis Post-Dispatch did a lot of work, and the trash paper in Quincy, Illinois, the Herald Whig, did, by my count, over 100 stories throughout the course of this, all saying the same thing, all running with this party headline. But none of them ever reported the day after the flood. He drove 7 hours north to the only working bridge the day after the flood into Iowa to use that bridge to get to Missouri to go pick his wife up, and he brought her home. He brought her home the next day. He never partied. They didn't say any of that. They just ran. They took it to the point where it was sexy, and then they left the reader to draw their own conclusions, which naturally they think, yeah, he had the most epic party of the 90s, and that just didn't happen.
Yeah. Has anyone from back when the trial happened come forward now and spoken in a way that caused some skepticism about the ruling and his prison sentence?
One of the jurors is pretty upset. All these years later, it's bothering her. Yeah, there's definitely regret on the part of at least one juror. There was regret on the part of another juror who's since passed away that I talked about in the book. The problem is this has been so long that the people are either retired or a lot of them are now dead that were involved. So the people I knew that were remorseful or regretful, most of them have passed away, not all of them. In terms of the principals, though, that were responsible for convicting James Scott, I'm kind of reading between the lines through that Vice documentary, but the one farmer who was the president of the drainage district, the local farmer in charge of looking for gopher holes in the levee in between maintenance by the Corps of Engineers, but he kind of got stuck with babysitting this levee during the flood. In that Vice documentary, he expresses some remorse, in my opinion. He says he thinks James Scott has served his time.
And that's where, for me, if I'm a citizen of Missouri or a representative of Missouri, and this is a criminal conspiracy, right? When you have people who are witnesses on a case who then financially benefit from the outcome of said case, I'm sorry, that's a criminal conspiracy. There's no way around that. That's a problem. And if I'm a representative in Missouri, I would want to right that wrong, even if it's 30 years later. Wouldn't you want Missouri to be known as a state that seeks justice, and that will right something, even if it's been 30 years? We'll try to make it right and prove to their citizens that they won't let something like this type of awful injustice stand any longer.
So you sent me, it was a statement from Dr. Hammer.
Yeah.
Is that it? And he did not get to testify at the trial. And that's a pretty big deal because he's someone who could speak to the science of the matter and how that was not practical at all, how that doesn't make any sense. Did he ever comment on why the judge didn't want him to testify and what happened there?
Well, it's actually more subversive than that. He did testify, but the prosecution objected to his testimony, saying that it's hearsay because he wasn't right there when the levee broke. But he wasn't called in as an eyewitness. He was called in as an expert scientific witness. So the judge struck his testimony from the record, so the jury wasn't allowed to consider it when they were deliberating.
That seems so bizarre to me because I feel like experts testify like that all the time.
Well, it not only do they testify like that all the time, he had testified in 21 trials as an expert witness. I think it's important. Let me take a step back just to qualify who Dr. Hammer is. Dr. Hammer is a graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy at Annapolis. He was then a combat Marine in Vietnam. He flew fixed-wing mission, over 100 fixed-wing combat missions in a Phantom. He then came back to the States, got his master's degree in soil and atmospheric sciences from the University of Illinois. Then he got his PhD from the University of Tennessee. He also was tapped to be the lead investigator and the chair of the Department of Agriculture's soil department. He was the chair of the department at the University of Missouri. I mean, his credential, he's beyond reproach. He's on Everest in this field of soil and hydrology. In every other trial he's ever been called to be an expert witness on. He also wrote the textbook, by the way, in the 90s on various factors that can impact water flow and watershed. This is the only time he had ever seen anything like this, where they objected to the experts, and they also wouldn't let him in the court to hear the prosecution's experts. So he had to see it on court TV, and he basically realized something's wrong in Denmark because there's zero evidence. There's no science coming from the prosecution. There's just speculation on the part of the people that were tasked with babysitting the levee under flood stages.
I'll read to you an excerpt from a statement from Dr. David Hammer. The levee failure at Quincy was an inevitable natural disaster, particularly under the intensity and duration of the flood, the specific conditions at the site of the levee failure, and the deliberate, harmful mismanagement of the levee after prolonged saturation. James Scott was a scapegoat, and the trial that convicted him was a sham and an embarrassment to the state of Missouri. I remain in complete disbelief of the dishonesty and nonsense I witnessed in the courtroom. The thing that a lot of people don't realize, if you just see this in passing or you see it as a meme on the internet, was that there were people who depended on his conviction for financial gain as a result of their land being affected by the flood. I was reading about it, and I heard that there was somebody who didn't disclose a financial interest, like a pretty significant financial interest, that their land, when it was destroyed by the flood, he wouldn't have gotten any sort of insurance money unless it was sort of a man-made ordeal. If it was a natural disaster, a natural flood, he wouldn't have gotten reimbursed. But if James were convicted and it was an act of vandalism, he would be getting an insurance payout. What can you speak to the truth of that? Is that accurate?
Yeah, it's accurate. I'll actually one up you. I'll give you some breaking news if you want to be the one to break it. The guy you're talking about, that's the guy I just mentioned, Norman Hare. So he was the guy in charge of maintaining that levee. He made the decision to bulldoze. He's also a generational farmer. His daddy, his granddaddy, his great-granddaddy, they all farm the river bottoms in around the West Quincy, Missouri, Palmyra, Missouri area. And so generationally, they were tasked with babysitting the levee. 3 weeks after the levee broke, he testified before Congress on August 1st, 1993, where he just blasted the Corps of Engineers for basically maintaining a bad levee and saddling him with a responsibility that was never supposed to be his. So he pointed his finger at the Corps 3 weeks later. The thing is, he never disclosed that at trial. And in 93, nobody suspected there would be this thing called the internet that's going to pop up and give you access. Like, essentially, if you weren't watching C-SPAN on August 1st, 1993, you missed it. I missed it when I wrote the book, but this is one of those events that has presented itself. And then all of a sudden, a month and a half later, they come up with James Scott, who vandalized the levee. Norman Hare received an insurance payout because he didn't have federal and flood insurance through FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, which would cover giant floods. If you live in a floodplain, I live on one myself. If you live in a floodplain, you have to carry special insurance through either FEMA or one of their licensed agencies, because the presumption is you're going to flood at some point. So a private insurance company is not going to insure you if you don't have that sort of flood insurance, basically backstopped by the government if there's a catastrophic flood. These generational farmers didn't have that, and they didn't have it because there had never been a flood this big. They had floods, but no one is suspected it would wash out 14,000 acres of crop. He wouldn't have been able to recuperate from this flood had somebody not vandalized the levees. So him and other people like him filed a homeowner's policy under the vandalism clause. Essentially, it's like if somebody threw a bunch of rocks through your windows and went four-wheeling on your corn. That's how they treated it. It was vandalism, so they could collect.
And is that something that ever came up later on? Was there any sort of appeal where that was mentioned? Or I know that the original, trial was thrown out. They had to do a retrial. But were there any appeals after the second conviction?
Yeah, there was an appeal with an asterisk. So he had two different court-appointed attorneys. He comes from no money. His family was working poor.
Yeah.
After the second conviction, can't do it. Appointed resources dried up. So he had one of the guys in prison, kind of like the jailhouse lawyer, filed the appeal on his behalf, and they rejected it, and that's it. Case closed. So there was no opportunity to file another appeal because that's double jeopardy.
I think it'd be good for people to know a little more about kind of what he's been going through for the last 30 odd years. Being in a prison that high security, what is his day like? I mean, you've talked to him probably more than anyone, right? What is his life like in there?
Very structured. For 20 of the last some odd years, he's been working in the prison panel factory.
Okay.
He's now made, I guess, would be equivalent of foreman. Like he has a management role where he oversees the other inmates and helps project management essentially. So by every account, he's been a model inmate. And that's not me saying that. There's guards that are writing letters of recommendation of the parole board, and the fact that he kept getting paroled up through the food chain. So he is in a level 5 maximum security prison, and has, with that work permission structure of management, he has basically the best life. And I'm putting that in air quotes, that you could have in a level 5 max, meaning he has his own cell. It's 7 by 10, but at least he doesn't have to share that with a cellmate. And he's out of that cell more than most of the other level 5 inmates just because he has a management role. But no, it's a horrible life. I mean, it's absolutely grueling.
Yeah.
And I think I want to touch on too, just unless I'm wrong, Adam, but something to add to that is a level 5 prison. He is the only current prisoner in the country who's in a level 5 maximum security prison who has no history of violent crimes. Is that right?
Definitely in Missouri. But you could probably extrapolate that out. If there are any other nonviolent offenders in a level 5 for prolonged periods of time, I mean, if there was a nonviolent offender that roughed up another inmate or a guard, they probably got shipped to a level 5. But no, he started in a level 5, and that's it. And he's filed multiple times to try to get a change of venue, as it were.
I was going to say, how do you know any idea how typical that is for somebody to be eventually moved out of the level 5 down to a lower security? Or
it happens if you can demonstrate a prolonged track record and level 5s, in addition to being the most strict, means it takes the most resources. So usually, and the jailhouse lawyer I was telling you about is an example of that. He was in a level 5 for 20 years, for a murder charge, and now he's been downgraded to a level 3.
Okay.
James has been in for 30 odd years for a nonviolent crime, and he's still there. So I try not to be a conspiracy theorist, which is why, like I said, when I started this, I wasn't trying to prove innocence. It's like a grounded theory. It's presenting itself the more research you do. Like, yes, I'm convinced he's innocent now. And yes, now I'm starting to convince, like, they're doing everything they can to keep him inside.
Mm-hmm.
Blake has done work in prisons with film and social work, I think it was, So he could speak to that from like the inside, how it works.
Well, first of all, it's the I can't imagine, even in the best case scenario, what it's like to be inside of a level 5 maximum security prison for 30 plus years. That alone to me is not just tragic, but shameful that he's still there. It's think about what you've done with your life over the last 30 years, and James has been in the same place in the same cell for allegedly doing something like moving a couple of bags. It's ludicrous.
Would you say, Adam, that you've seen a change in him over time, or do you feel like prison has, kind of changed him at all since you first met him?
Yes, he has changed. And I don't think it's prison that did it to him. I think it's just life's long timeline, of which, the older you get, life stops giving and it starts taking away. And so it took both his parents. They both died while he's been inside. It took his brother. He got divorced. He had cancer while he was in prison that he had to fight alone in prison. So I think all these things taken together at this point, he's, I don't want to say softened, but he's kind of more, he's more aware of life's vulnerability. And I think that also kind of speaks to his remorse for what happened to the community. By the same token, though, even in my conversations with him, I was like, why don't you just tell the parole board you're guilty? I'm sorry, just get out. And then you could maintain your innocence or fight to get your name back from the outside. Just get out, because you can't do anything in there. All of these things I just discussed, though, have kind of given him that realization. It's like, I'm not doing that. It's like, if I die in prison, and it could have happened any number of times over 30 years in a level 5, he's like, at least I'm going down standing up.
That's tough, though, because if you're really strong in your convictions, you don't want to obviously admit to something you didn't do. But at the same time, it's like the obviously risk is like staying in prison forever.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And most of us like to think we have the type of fortitude to stand up and not do that. But I can tell you that I wouldn't be able to do it. I'd say whatever they needed me to say to get out of prison.
Right. Yeah.
And I think that's another key point. I had the pleasure to speak to James in prison, and what you're struck by is that he's not. He even says it in the wonderful Vice documentary that Adam spoke of. He says, I wasn't a perfect man. I made mistakes when I was younger. That to me was very striking, that he doesn't hide behind anything. He doesn't hide his past at all. He admits that he wasn't the best guy in the world, but he also stands by what he thinks is right, and that's telling the truth. And he won't lie, even if it means saving his skin. He won't do it. I think that's not just honorable, but that's very rare in today's world. And I think that's just another reason why I feel so strongly about this case and want people to hear from him and know about this, because the good thing about social media is that these stories do get seen more than they used to. This James's case was essentially invisible for the better part of 20 plus years. Social media has started to bring it to light, but we just want to shine the light on the part of the story that we think needs to be spoken about.
Yeah.
I think once Blake and his team do the movie, I think now you'll have the trifecta of media saturation that this story really needed a long time ago. But like he said, I mean, in 93, not only was there no internet, even when I wrote the book in 07, there was no social media. So the only way this story was getting out was the very few of us that stuck with it and could place it in the media, because the mainstream media stayed away from it. They only wanted the sexy headline, and then they went away. Now that these memes are out there, these social posts, and people are aware of it, and then once the Vice documentary came out, which has 5.5 or more million views, people not only are waking up to the story, they are incensed by it, and I think once the Hollywood adaptation comes out, that's going to really coalesce. So whether or not he gets paroled at this upcoming hearing, or whether they lock him back up and then the movie comes out, I think it's only a matter of time before the pressure is going to be put on Missouri, the elected officials, the governor, and even on Illinois, who basically let this happen. They let Missouri prosecute one of their own residents when it was their cops that improperly questioned him without jurisdiction for this. Basically, it's a pressure cooker once we get that final piece.
Mm-hmm. What exactly is going to happen in this parole hearing? They're going to have him speak, I assume, and then you will also speak up for him. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I have no. I am advocating for his innocence. I've kind of had to assume this impossible role in that since there's nobody left. I mean, over 30 years, everyone's died or walked away from him.
Yeah,
I stuck around just because I had that sort of inside knowledge of the truth, and I'm not walking away. So yes, it's my understanding I'll be able to speak as his family representative or his plus one. You're only allowed to bring one person into a parole hearing anyway. Okay. There won't be a lawyer there. And I don't really know how it's going to work because I'm hearing that Missouri, in a very backwards situation, during COVID, they put all the parole hearings online and they never came back. So I have a feeling but it's unsupported because we can't talk to anyone about it. It's going to be me and him in a room in the prison on Zoom with the parole board. So we'll see how that shakes out.
Oh, wow. Yeah. That honestly feels so impersonal when it comes to like your life is on the line too.
Yeah. I mean, it's a lot easier to put somebody back in prison if you don't have to look at them face to face.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I am cautiously optimistic though. I read the bios on the parole board. There's a couple of them that I know probably already have their minds made up. But there are some honest people on there just looking at their background. So I'm hoping that if they deliberate, the ones that are the obvious question marks will be persuaded to do the right thing.
Mm-hmm. So he just has to show that he is like fit for life outside of prison. He doesn't necessarily have to show that he's taking full accountability. Is that right? Or you think he absolutely has to like apologize?
I don't know. I could speculate, Blake. I'm curious your answer. I mean, I assume that even though they're not there to relitigate the case, so it's kind of hard to. So if he takes this posture of innocence and they don't really care, they just want to know if he's sorry and if he's reformed and if he's a danger to society. It's kind of a chicken and egg. I don't know where you go from there.
Yeah.
I don't know, Blake. What do you think?
I
don't know if there's a better way to handle that situation.
I agree. I think it's what makes next week so fascinating to me and why we're trying to exert as much pressure and get the right facts out there because there is such a mystery and a cloud of vagueness around what do they need to determine, right? Is it just that he's a good model citizen and that he can enter society, or is it the fact that they need to see that he's remorseful and sorry for something I don't think he did, right? That's the real mystery of next week. We don't know. It's weird that that there's so little information. It's very frustrating.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the other thing too is that the real culprit, the real villain, is weather. And like what? So what do you got? So at the time I mentioned this is the 500-year flood. There'd never been one in recorded history as bad as this. I guess the only one that came close was Johnstown, and that was in the 1800s, and that was man-made. I'm from Cleveland, Ohio. Growing up on Lake Erie and lake effect weather, like we had worse snow than anyone and all throughout. But something has happened where there's less snow now than ever, and there's more rain now in the Midwest than ever. So whereas this was the 500-year flood, there's been a recorded 32 floods worse since this one happened.
There's a twist of fate that is recent. Adam, you and I haven't even spoken about how crazy this is, but when James was retried in '98, unfortunately there was yet another flood happening just outside the windows of where the trial was happening. So it was very easy, I think, in many ways, to get the jury to sympathize with flood victims when there was a flood just outside their door. And yet again, in a crazy twist of fate, Missouri is currently dealing with some serious flooding right now this week, only a handful of days before his parole hearing, and 33 years almost to the day of the actual first flood. So the fact that there's flooding going on again to me is so oddly poetically tragic to me.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think this is by design that they put the parole hearing. The conviction happened in November. So if you were going to stick with the timeline of enough time, a number of years served before your first parole hearing, it should be in November. I think they purposely put it in July. And one, because this is now the 35-year anniversary of the flood. I think it's 35, 93.
33, I think. If it was 93, yeah.
30. Okay. Yeah, 33, right. Sorry. Journalism's more of my thing, not the mathing part. No, so I think they purposely put it in July because they know just empirically through weather patterns, there will be floods in Missouri in July. And I think they realize that'll just another tool in the toolbox to try to inflame the board.
I mean, on the other hand, I guess you can kind of see how it's happening all the time now anyways, without intervention by someone who wants to
That's right.
party. You know what I mean?
That's right. That's right. And that is the key part here. When people talk about actual evidence, the evidence is that all of the levies had failed, or a majority of them had failed. And every scientist and expert said that they would have failed no matter what. Mm-hmm. To me, that's open and shut at that point, right? There's no more argument.
There were 1,083 levee breaks during the summer of 1993. 1,083 in the Midwest. One of them was deemed an act of sabotage. That's it.
Oh, okay.
I mean, again, it's it all just kind of, it's so obvious. Mm-hmm. They had the benefit of basically, we were still in the dark ages in 93. You couldn't avail yourself to this information. People really, the 10 odd years I researched the book before I actually wrote it, it was back and forth trips to libraries and historical societies and the newspaper. There was no way to get this information. Mm-hmm. Blake and his team had been able to find more stuff, in 6 to 8 months than I could in my first 10 years. So it's all out there now.
If you were going to ask me, how do you flip the actual case? To me, it's about the witness, Joe Flax. And I think, the fact that he gave testimony, the testimony is what essentially they hung Jimmy on. Well, I want to hear from this person again, right? And it's such if that's all that rests on the defense, or all that rests on the prosecution's claim, well, that seems pretty thin to me. I'd love to know what that person actually has to say about it. So.
Yeah, definitely. I want to hear from Neil and Bruce Baker, the two Illinois cops. I want to hear from Tom Reddington, the former prosecutor who's now a judge. I want to hear from Norman Hare. I want to hear from these people that are should be in Cooperstown in the annals of legal history, since they got the only conviction of all time. Why aren't you talking? Why are the only people talking me and the soil scientist? It does not make sense. I think they're hiding something, and mm-hmm. I challenge them to publicly call me out and tell me where I'm wrong. The book came out in 2007. They all spoke to me for the book because I wrote that book objectively straight down the middle. Warts and all, I did not advocate. I didn't start advocating until years later because this started happening. They all clammed up. More evidence of circumstances that exonerated him came up. And I think once those came to light, they're like, all right, let's keep quiet. This doesn't look good.
What were the circumstances you think that exonerated him that you think made them freak out?
There's a jurisdictional question about why was he interrogated by Illinois cops. There's actually a jurisdictional question about why was this tried on the state level at all when the Mississippi River is a federal waterway. That's kind of a biggie. Why the story changed twice. Why at one point they said he was too dirty to have worked on a levee, or he was so dirty that it looks like he'd been burrowing in the levee, and then by the next trial he's too clean to have been working on the levee all day. They say he moved 5 sandbags. I could move 500 sandbags. It's not going to change. That levee had bulldozers running up and down it. It had trucks driving on it. It had thousands of Army Corps of Engineers and volunteer feet walking up and down it. And one guy sabotaged it in 5 minutes by pulling 5 sandbags. That's a pretty weak levee. And then really the most, and why did they cover up the scientists? Why were they afraid of the scientists? One other point that didn't get exposed in the Vice documentary, I mentioned in the book, but again, this was a long time ago. If you go to the actual crime scene, again, air quotes, if you go to the actual crime scene where it took place, they reinforced that area of the levee with these giant limestone boulders called riprap. They're extremely expensive. They're very hard to get there and truck in. They're not native to that area. So they reinforced this area. David Hammer said the reason they did that is because they know this is where the levee was going to break. Like, this is the weak point. There's 6 parameters that could deem a levee failable. If a levee meets any one of 6 conditions, it could fail. This one met all 6, and all the soil scientists said the same thing. So they reinforced a weak spot, because you don't reinforce a crime scene. So again, it's an admission that they knew it was weak there. Anyway, I could laundry list you all day.
Well, and I'll elaborate on the one that I think definitely is the one that always bugged me, is that their star witness, Joe Flax, never spoke again after his testimony, and is to this day has vanished. You know, to me, you want to talk criminal true crime conspiracies, I don't think it gets any more incredible than the fact that their star witness is gone. You know.
Yeah, and he's alive and well, but he just kind of left town, right?
Yeah. Yeah, well, and won't speak about the case, which to me, if you were telling the truth, why would you not want to talk about the case? You know,
right. I asked Adam how we could support James as he continues to serve his time in prison.
Yeah, you know, I started a GoFundMe account right after the Vice documentary to try to just basically raise money for a lawyer. A lawyer stepped up that had actually had success getting somebody else out of the same prison for a false murder conviction. He's in a level 5 maximum security prison. He's in like the highest level security with the outside of a supermax, which is where they put, you know, like McVeigh was in a supermax. So this lawyer stepped up with the GoFundMe. Now, basically all that money just goes to Jim. Whenever he needs money on his books, I just put it there. So people could donate there. Hopefully if he does get paroled, he'll have a nice little nest egg when he gets out. But that lawyer, I could give you his information if I'll just make sure he's okay with it if you put his email that people could, because he's liaising with the parole board right now.
After sitting in prison for over 30 years for causing this flood, James's first chance at getting parole will be coming up 6 days from now. I'll have more on this story tomorrow, including some footage from the flood, the testimony in Congress, the response from one of the local papers and from one of the investigators who saw Adam's interview with Omar, and what you can do to help James get his story out there ahead of his parole hearing. All of that's coming soon, but for now, you can find the link to Jimmy's fund in the description of this video and in the comments section. Don't forget to like this video for me. It helps me out a lot. And if you could share so more people could see Jimmy's story, that would make a lot of difference. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you all soon.